Hello, this is the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group bi-weekly meeting for December 8th, 2016. It's been a while since we've met. We skipped a week due to the Thanksgiving holiday here in the States, but we're back and it's December 8th and we're excited to talk about some good stuff that's coming up for the library today. We got a lot to go over, so we'll jump right in. For the folks that might be new to the call, always good to review kind of who we are and what we do. We're part of the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program. And within that program, there's a lot of different stuff going on. And so we came up with the idea, oh gosh, it's been maybe almost a year now, of having these ideas of special interest groups. And this was the first, the client scripting or client-side development special interest group. And we've now expanded that to include the SharePoint framework, which is getting closer and closer every day to general release or general availability. And we have open discussions and conversations around the SharePoint framework and those patterns and development practices and things you can do with the SharePoint framework. We're going to keep expanding on that as we get into and beyond GA. As the community starts to learn more, starts to get into it a little bit deeper, we'll really expand that part of the programming as well. But we're also here to support the JavaScript core component, that library we've developed for almost a year now, maybe a little less. So sort of taking that same idea of the managed code core library, really bringing that to the JavaScript world, not in the idea that we're going to translate every function from the core library to JavaScript, but rather taking that same just idea of making development easier for folks who are coming into client-side development, coming into using REST with SharePoint, coming into the SharePoint framework for the first time, taking away a little bit of that work and kind of wrapping up some of the REST calls, and then as we progress, wrapping up some other things where we can add some efficiency and add some simplicity to people's lives. We've got two great links down there at the bottom. The first is the PnP community, which goes to the Microsoft Tech community, and that is a great place to get your questions answered, have discussions around topics, and that would be the replacement for our previous Yammer community, which we unfortunately had to leave behind a few months ago. And the next link, if you haven't been there, check out dev.office.com/SharePoint. That's your one-stop shop for all things SharePoint development. A lot of great information on getting started with the SharePoint framework there, as well as information on add-in development and classic SharePoint development. So it's a great starting point if you're new to SharePoint all up, or if you're just new to, for example, the SharePoint framework. That's a great place to get started, and it'll walk you through doing your first project, getting your development environment set up, and those sorts of activities. So really great resources there. So moving on, what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about the latest on the SharePoint framework. We've got Vesa on the call with us to get an update there. We're going to talk about the JavaScript core component, and we're going to do a community demo. And you might notice we've got a 2.0 number there. So we'll talk through what that means, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end for open discussion, questions, comments, whatever you'd like to provide feedback on. Really, that's a big part of this call as well, is opening it up to the community and getting the great feedback from everybody. And if we could just double check everybody's on mute for me. And so, Vesa, you want to take it away?
Yes, so I'll take it away. So I'll be relatively short today, so I don't have any fancy slides, just one slide to get everybody up to date on where we are with SharePoint Framework. So first of all, the SharePoint Framework, drop number 6, we actually haven't covered this in the past, went live on 22nd of November. So that was around what was it? The holiday in the US. Come on, Thanksgiving thingy is which rest of the world have no idea. The Turkey Liberation Day, wasn't that the thing, Patrick?
It's just called Thanksgiving, man.
Okay, cool. So anyway, drop 6 is live from 22nd of November, and one of the things what we released as part of that is that the online workbench is now available under the SharePoint Online site, so you no longer have to upload the workbench explicitly to your site, where we're actually using that. And at the same time, the developer preview was extended from the dev tenants to first release tenants. One thing to notice on this one, you need to have a first release tenant. So it's not enough that you assign an individual person to be in the first release node or mode. The tenant itself has to be in the first release situation. And after that, you can then use the SharePoint framework developer preview to develop stuff in that tenant as well. And really important to realize that the drop number 6 is not yet, let's say, final one, which means that it's not ready for production usage. There will be still breaking changes. And I would say that the biggest breaking changes are coming actually pretty soon. So pretty soon, I don't want to even speculate this, but pretty soon, we will come up with a release candidate, the first release candidate, and this will be announced when we get to a certain threshold of the tenants in server side to be with the latest version. So in SharePoint Online, we need to remember that SharePoint Online is actually a massive amount of servers. So how we do our patching on the server side is that we push updates, for example, for server-side SharePoint framework requirements, gradually for a 10%, then 20%, then 30% of the tenants worldwide. So when we hit the 10% marker around that time, we will actually do announcement that the release candidate is coming soon, and it will be working gradually within the first release tenants whenever the latest versions are landing to the tenants themselves. Whenever we do this announcement, if you pull down the latest packages from the NPM, it might be that those packages only work in a local workbench, but after your tenant has been upgraded to the latest version within days, not within weeks, then the online workbench is working properly as well. There will be breaking changes. The one thing what we wanted to do in here, because we're still in the developer preview, we want to do the breaking changes obviously before we go to the GA. GA means general availability, which means the version 1.0. So there will be breaking changes as part of the release candidate, which is coming out soon, like mentioned, but we'll pinpoint those needed changes within if you have done any development on a client-side web parts. We are pretty close to GA with the release candidate. There are some known issues which will be then called out whenever we can go closer to the GA. GA is happening, well, won't be happening too far either, which is a good thing. And immediately when the release candidate 0 is out, we'll refresh the tutorials, the tutorial videos, and also all of the samples what we have available within a GitHub. So every single sample will be upgraded to the release candidate 0 level, because then you're able to pull them down and they will work 100% within your deployment. Right now we're in a kind of this nasty situation where we're chasing always the latest drop, and then there's another drop, and then there's another critical thing which we need to concentrate, and we never get all of the samples or tutorials in a fully polished situation. Now that we're heading closer to the GA, we'll do a bigger push on updating everything, and that should actually make things fine. What else? New samples under SharePoint GitHub organization that show different aspects. So in the GitHub/SharePoint, we have the SPFx web parts, so SharePoint framework web parts. There are new samples there. I have a list on the following slide on what's actually coming. And we're still also queuing up additional articles in the dev.ops.com/SharePoint, where we have all of the SharePoint framework articles, tutorials, and everything else. Whenever the release candidate 0 comes out, it will take a few days for us to really refresh that guidance as well, making sure that everything is up to the right level. But that's going to happen relatively soon. A few pointers on the SharePoint framework samples and webcast. From a samples perspective, there's a few new Angular samples from a community site which have been submitted. There's one new Knockout sample which is submitted from a community site, and then quite a few React samples. We follow up on a certain naming convention. If you want to contribute your client-side web part sample, please have a look on the contribution guidance. It will actually tell you all of the namings, all of the guidance, how to submit your samples available for other ones as well. And then on the video side, There's building a real-time newsfeed web part with SharePoint framework, and maybe the building multi-view web parts with Angular are really the new ones. The one on the middle, where we as the PnP core team talk about the future of SharePoint development, is actually a pretty interesting one as well, and we hope also touch the SharePoint framework on that topic and that discussion as well. But that's pretty much the latest on the samples and the webcast side. Kevin is asking, how do we want to handle upgrading the contributed samples for release candidate 0? Do you upgrade all the samples, or do you notify contributors? So if contributors are upgrading them, that's fine as well. We will upgrade all of the samples if contributors do not have time to do that. So, and it's just a matter of having that discussion. Maybe I haven't actually decided how to have that discussion. Maybe I'll go back on the original pull requests and add comments and ask if people want to upgrade or should we upgrade. Either way. Good. But that's really the objective, is to get all of the samples pretty fast on the right level, and we'll go through at the same time the documentation of the samples and double check all of the additional settings on them as well, so they're up to date. And we actually, and then we will have a easy search tool for the SPFx samples quite soon as well. Right now, well, it's still pending for final fine-tuning. So you can actually use a tool within the dev.office.com to find all of the SharePoint framework samples which are out there, rather than going to the GitHub and trying to find what's relevant for you. But that's pretty much from a SharePoint framework side. So I'll give it back to Patrick. Patrick, there we go.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Thanks,
Took it over.
Great stuff. So we're going to go through a little bit here on the core component and talk about some updates there. First, as always, wanted to thank everybody that's contributed. Tommy Tavella, you've got a pull request out there, and I did want to mention on this call, in case you're listening, I do see it and will process it, but I haven't yet because of some of the work I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. I've been focused on that, and so don't think I'm neglecting your pull request. And as well, Andrew, I see yours as well, so we'll get to those. But thank you, everybody that's contributed, very much appreciated. So it really keeps the project really alive in the community to see so many folks joining in and participating and contributing. So what are some opportunities to participate in the SPFx or the JavaScript Special Interest Group? So demo SharePoint Framework web part on this call. You've seen that on the last few calls. So if you're working on a SharePoint Framework web part and you'd like to do a demo, please just get in touch with myself or Vesa, and we'll get you on the schedule. It might not be the next call necessarily, depending on what else is in the pipeline, but we'll definitely get you an opportunity to demo your work. It's really valuable, I think, for us and for everybody to see what other folks are doing with the framework and really learn from each other. We've already seen some really cool demos from a lot of different folks. Demo any SharePoint PnP.js related project. So we've seen a great demo on node authentication from Sergey 6 weeks ago, maybe, but that was really neat. But it wasn't necessarily SharePoint framework specific, but it was really neat to see the usage of that. So encourage those kind of demos as well. Absolutely contribute on GitHub, whether it's submitting issues, whether it's submitting pull requests, things like that. Great way to get involved, and that's across all of the patterns and practices projects, of course, whether you're interested in client-side development or not. And then, of course, provide feedback. And the way to do that is on these calls, via issues in GitHub, via Gitter, via the Microsoft Tech communities. Stack Exchange are all great places to provide feedback. So we're all very receptive to that feedback and really try and be responsive to the feedback we get from folks on ways to improve what we're doing and improve not just the library but the overall ecosystem. And I think folks that have been active in the SharePoint framework discussions will really see that the engineering teams are very responsive to that feedback. Pardon me, very responsive to that feedback, and really like to get that from the community, so thank you. So what's been happening? Kind of a lot. So as the SharePoint framework moves to GA, I've in the background been looking at making sure our library is aligned very much to what's going to happen with GA. So in that sense, I've started updates that will become library version 2.0. And what that means in terms of the versioning in the Semver sense of things is that it's a breaking change. So it's going to be a breaking change from the 1.0 stuff, but it should not, I don't think, be a breaking change to folks who are using the library in projects. So some of the things that are going to occur, the NPM package, the lib folder, is now going to be ES6 modules as opposed to ES5. And we're going to look at all this stuff here shortly in the demo section, but I did want to kind of talk through it a little bit and then show it to you. So the whole build pipeline for all the gulp commands has been fully updated, and then that's going to really simplify things, I think, for both developers and for myself and others when we package the library. We've replaced TypeDoc with JSDoc. And that's not to say TypeDoc isn't great, but it doesn't seem to be getting updated as best as I can tell. I've been waiting for a few releases now for it to support TypeScript 2.0, and that doesn't seem to be coming anytime soon. So there's actually pull requests sitting out there for the TypeDoc library that haven't been accepted. So we've replaced that with JSDoc. We'll look at that. I've updated the folder structure. There's better debugging support. We'll take a look at that. I've removed provisioning, all the provisioning code from the library. And before anybody freaks out, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in the future of that. And then the PnP.js and the min.js, so those the packaged libraries are now bundled with Webpack and transpiled to ES5 using Babel. So a little bit different approach than we were taking, but I think overall moving to Webpack away from Browsify and some of the other things has been a good change and allowed us to do some better, more consistent work, I guess I'll say, and really simplify things. So let's jump right into that demo, and I'm going to try and get my desktop presented here. Somebody could just ping the IM chat there when that becomes visible. Anybody?
Still loading, at least for me. Just got it. Cool.
Just got it? Okay, great. So jumping right in, if we look at, this is the core library, the first thing you're going to notice here in Visual Studio Code is 99 plus changed files. So let's take a look at what that really means and what those changes are. So in the VS Code, the first thing we did is some updates here specifically to debug. And so you'll see that we've got a debug task that now points to a specific debug file, and so we'll walk through that here in a second. So that was one of the updates. So we've got debugging support, so F5 debugging support in Visual Studio Code. And if we look at the debug.ts, so this is sort of a starting point for our debugging, because we need an entry point for these things. And so for us, this debug.ts is that entry point. And what that means is when I hit F5, this is what's going to run. And you can see we've imported an example, and our example test is here. So it's a very simple, this is just an example to sort of show you guys, show everybody kind of how to get started with debugging. So I've just hit F5, and we're going to let that spin up here. And you can see I'm getting out of the settings file my client ID, secret, and site URL. I'll hit F5 again. So we're using the PnP setup, so we can do the request straight out of Node. And so we're getting our output here, and so you can see we're using the internal consoles. And then we're setting up the logger, and then we're going to run our example task here. And if we look in the debug console, we've now been able to get, here's our web's title, and you can see this is the response from the site. So you guys have seen me do that a lot of times. The real power now, though, is I can actually set my debug points here in the actual code, as well as go into the source folder. And you can see already the hierarchy has changed here, but I'm going to go into SharePoint and I'm going to go into, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go into SharePoint. I'm going to go into Logger, and I'm going to look for the console logger, and I'm going to place a breakpoint right here. So now I can actually hit F5 again, and this is going to run, and I'm able to actually debug live the library itself against SharePoint using the node request client, and immediately get feedback on changes I might be making. So here we've hit our breakpoint, for example, and step into that, and then we'll get to our breakpoint in the logger. So I can look at the full object I'm getting back here, all the properties of that object. I can look at logger and all these different things, and I can hit go. Then I actually get my breakpoint here in the console listener, so I can look at what's coming into that. And so that's a very simple example. I just wanted to show on the call very quickly the ability to debug the actual library as you're working on it. So if you're adding a function, say you're adding something to web to I don't know, create a group or something, you can actually debug that in real time now as you're working. So the method for that, we've actually got a new wiki page. This is out there, but it's not listed in the table of contents yet. But it's going to walk you through how to do this debugging and set this up in your own environment. And so the way I've done it is for each debugging scenario you'd like to create, you would add a file to this debug folder. So I would add a file here, and then I've got the git ignore set up to not add those files. So you'll be able to have 1 or 100 of your own debugging scenarios locally without worrying about populating them into GitHub. And so the way to run them, and again that article talks about it, would be to comment out this example and add an import and run for your various debugging scenarios. So this steps you through that entire process. We've got an example here to ensure a list and demonstrate that, and then how to update the debug.ts as well. So we also, of course, still support in-browser debugging. So I want to show that real quick. And that is still supported via gulp serve. That command itself hasn't changed. But what has changed is we're now doing this with Webpack and the Webpack development server, which has actually created a much more solid pipeline for when I make updates to my files. Webpack is watching all my source files, will rebuild the project and reserve it. So I'm actually just going to leave that running. I'll show you why here in a second. And then we've got a section down here on debugging in SharePoint Framework. So one really cool thing you can do in SharePoint Framework, if you haven't already, is you can have external references. So we've actually set it up. You can set the external reference to be the local host of this PnP JS that's getting served. So, oops, pardon me, sorry. So if you look, we're serving this at localhost assets pnp.js. And if I come over here, and I'm going to do, I've got a SharePoint Framework, just vanilla web part Hello World project set up that's actually just using, just using the library to show a random set of characters. So we'll get that running. Get that running as that takes a second. I'll glance and see if there's any questions here. Are the modern canvases being more not bases got that? All right, cool. No questions for me. Great. So as this is spinning up, you've all seen this before. So here's my workbench, and I'm going to add a Hello World web part. So there's my random string. It's super impressive, but what I wanted to show you is if I actually come all the way back, and I'm back in my JavaScript library local project, and I'm using the getRandomString method. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say chars is chars times 20. So instead of getting 6 or 8 or whatever I was doing before, I'm going to say 20. And if I go look, you'll see Webpack is now saying the bundle is invalid. It's going to rebuild. The bundle is now valid. And if I come back, I'll refresh my Workbench page, and you can instantly see the change in the SharePoint Framework. So this allows you to, if you're working with SharePoint Framework and working with the library, you can now tie those things together and see your changes and updates in real time. So this should really help folks who are trying to develop on both or trying to work with both, or maybe add a new feature to the library that they want to work in SharePoint Framework to work very closely together. And then, of course, if I hit F12, You've got all the source maps, so you can debug the original TypeScript and things from the library, as well as all the SharePoint framework stuff, the way this is now set up. So a way to debug everything in the browser all as one unit, which I think is a really great improvement to kind of some of the stuff we were doing before. So I'm just going to kill these servers. And moving on, actually before we move on, let me delete that so that doesn't accidentally get left in. So the next thing I want to talk about is the simplifying of all the gulp tasks. So you'll see here a few of them have gone away and a lot of them are still here. So we haven't taken away any functionality for folks. So if you were using sync before, sync is still there. If you're using package, lint, etc., all the functionality is still there, but hopefully we've simplified things and made things a little bit easier to understand. And that starts with moving the configuration. Some of you might remember the gulp file used to have a lot of different settings getting plugged into the global object, and honestly that got a little confusing. And so what we've done is move this into a single configuration file here under the gulp tasks folder. So again, we're still building the banner from the package. We're still getting the settings. We haven't really changed what we're doing. We've just moved it around a little bit. And then we've got all the different paths and everything are now defined here in this as a module. And then for each of these things, we've really broken out everything to be much more sort of organized in, I think, a much clearer way. And what I mean by that is, and this is a product, honestly, of myself and others, and we were all sort of learning as we were doing this the first time around. And a lot of these, if you remember, each of the build configurations was different, using different TS config options, and there's a lot of sort of, let's be honest with ourselves, hacking going on to kind of make things work. So we've really cleaned that up. And so these are all of the build tasks. So here's the build task that does the library. Here's the build task used with testing. And here's the build task used with debugging. We'll talk about testing here in a second, but you can see the debugging is grabbing our source code and grabbing everything out of the debug folder and then running all that stuff in a folder as well. And then we're rewriting the source maps, again, to make all that work for folks. But one of the key differences is all of this is keyed off of the same TS config file. So I think that's a really important improvement. I think it really cleans things up from some of the stuff that we were doing before. So you can see all the build tasks. Clean has been changed, but generally is the same as just deleting some files. Docs, I'll come back to in a second. I've added this index, which is actually requiring all the files in the gulp tasks folder. So if we actually look at the gulpfile.js, we're just requiring out of gulp tasks. So this gulp file itself is very clean, so we can add stuff by just updating this index. Linting, pretty much the same, no big changes there. Packaging is a big change. If you guys remember, the packaging folder packaging task used to be very big, had a lot of kind of hacky things going on in it. So we've done a nice bit of cleanup here. The first one, we're packaging up the definitions. So to make that happen sort of cleanly, we still have to modify the TS config a little bit. This is the only place we have to do that. But then we're running the gulp source pipeline, as you would expect, getting the typings, putting them into the dist folder. And then now the big change is we're using Webpack to package these things. And with Webpack, we're actually using a Webpack config file. And we've got two different configurations in here, one for the non-minified and one for the minified versions. And this, again, Webpack, if you haven't used it, originally we had chosen Browsify, basically at random, I suppose. There wasn't really a great reason one way or the other. But as we've moved forward, we're doing a little bit more now around Webpack, and it seems to be a little bit more feature-rich and have a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more sort of support out there in the community. So not a knock on Browsify at all, but just sort of a move towards Webpack because I think it fits what we're trying to do a little bit better. So you can see we're actually keying everything off of the lib folder now. So we're building everything based on the TS config using TypeScript to move to JavaScript. And then we're using Webpack to package JavaScript into a single JavaScript file. We're still producing a UMD module. We're still producing the same variable name. So this is what I meant when I said this should not change folks who are consuming, for example, PnP.js. Their life shouldn't change. So you shouldn't have a breaking change to the like a production place where you're using this. We're still transpiling down to ES5 using Babel. One side effect is this has made the files a little bit bigger, but not so much bigger that it's not worth, I think, the overall simplicity of configuring things through these config files. So update to the package task. The serve task has also been updated, and we're now using Webpack along with the Webpack development server. Those of you who are familiar with that, I've become a big fan. You've seen me demo it on that sort of example testing project I've used for a long time. But the Webpack development server is what allows us to do gulp serve, and it watches the files, reserves them out. And that's all, again, powered by a single configuration file, helping things out, sort of making things a little bit more config file based as opposed to sort of hacks within the task based. Sync still works exactly as it did before with the uploading of the file, the JS files, to your style library /PnP. It's been cleaned up a little bit, but it is still here, still works exactly as before, but we've upgraded to gulp SPSave 3.0. So I think a great update in terms of features, and allows us to supply different credentials. So you can now use a client ID and secret, or you can use the username and password exactly as you were doing before. So not a breaking change in sync, but cleaned up a little bit. And then testing has been updated slightly. And we've also got then, on deployment, and then I have not written it. That's why that article's not there. So we're going to have an updated article on testing and how to do that, make that a little bit more clear for folks, because I think there was some confusion before with running just certain tests or running all the tests. And the other page I wanted to show you is we've now got a page, and you can see these are live. Like I said, they're just not in the table of contents yet, that describes each of these gulp tasks to help folks as they're getting into the library on how to run tests and how to run a single part of the tests or to run all the tests. And so as well, the rest of the commands are described in this article. So we'll be updating the documentation along with this 2.0 release. So that's the full redo of the build pipeline. One of the key differences is that it really keys everything off of the lib folder. So we're getting a very standardized approach to everything sort of working off of the lib, which comes straight from the TypeScript compiler, which I think is a nice improvement and will be a little bit cleaner in terms of what's going on there. So let's talk then about, I said we'll skip over docs. So we've gone to JS doc, and if we look at, if we look at the docs task, you'll see it's shrunk and been cleaned up a little bit, and we've got the JS doc config. So again, we're moving to config files versus having the stuff buried in the tasks. And this is very simple. I actually just did this change yesterday. So right now we're just using the default template, and we're seeing what kind of output that puts out. And so we can do the same thing with gulp docs. That's gulp docs is not a command. So gulp docs. And that's actually going to build the lib again. So the docs are being built off of the lib, so they're keyed off of the same files that would be in the final project. And if we go look at that guy, if we look in docs, we've got all our files here, and we can open the index. And so you can see we've built up, here's our README, and then you can look at the individual classes and things again. This is the default template. This is going to be another opportunity I'm going to highlight for folks to really help out. If you want to help make us a really cool template, we're going to have a separate patterns and practices JS doc template project in GitHub. That's not there yet. I'm still working with Vesa to get that established, but we'll use that for the template here and perhaps other projects, but that's a great opportunity for folks to get involved. And I think this is honestly a little bit simpler than TypeDoc and having to do all the handlebars stuff and whatnot. So we're generating the docs again. That'll go out with the 2.0 release. We hadn't been able to update the docs for a few releases, which is not really ideal. So we've got the docs. You can, of course, look at the lib folder, and you can see, for example, if we look at files, no, that's not really great. If we look at SharePoint, so you can see this is ES6. We've got classes and things like that defined. So very much more the ES6 style in the lib folder. This is actually going to be a nice advantage when Webpack 2.0 comes out. There's something we had talked about a long time ago when we started the library called tree shaking. Mike Morrison, I think, was the one that brought this up originally. And at the time, it was a great idea, but it didn't really have wide support. So we didn't really do much with it. We didn't aim to not support it, but we were sort of blocked from supporting it because Node at the time, we were on 3. whatever or 4. whatever for the long-term support version, didn't do ES6 modules. We've now, we're on Node 6.9 is now the long-term support version, and it does support ES6 modules. So we were able to make this change. So these run in Node exactly as you would expect, and then they will run when they're packaged up and transpiled down to ES5, they should run in the browser just as you would expect. So a change there, wanted folks to be aware of that. You will, if you've got an older version of Node, need to upgrade to 6.9. whatever the last number is when you do move to 2.0 once we release that to work with it locally. But I am going to, one of our wiki articles is going to be an upgrade or a transition guide for how to update your development environment around the move to 2.0. So talked about that. So let's talk about the updated folder structure. So the big update to the folder structure is in source SharePoint. You might remember there used to be a REST folder, and I've gotten rid of that because we've gotten rid of the provisioning. So it made sense to just bounce everything up a level. And I did the same thing in tests. Everything has bounced up a level, so we're out of that RESTs folder. That really shouldn't affect anybody, but if folks happen to, for some reason, be referencing things directly, you might need to update a path, but did want to make folks aware of that as you're looking for things. Sorry, I'm in lib, so if we look at source, if you're looking for things, it's moved up a folder. Otherwise, everything else is more or less exactly where it was before. So we've got, pardon me, as we talked about before, great debugging support. So now I wanted to talk about provisioning. As you can see, we've dropped provisioning out of the core library. And I wanted to talk through that so folks sort of understand why we made that decision and what is the future of provisioning with the JS core. So there is a future. Let's start with that. But the reason we made that decision is because we have a provisioning project that is in the managed C# code that's been worked on for years. We've had lots of great contributions to that and is very mature and is widely used and has a lot of great features, as well as the partner pack and other great examples. And it works very well in sort of the microservice format. So if we wanted to call that from a client-side web part, for example, that would sort of be the pattern. It would be to put something in a queue somewhere, and then you could have a provisioning service pick that up. The other part of that is there's a very rich template definition that is supported by that CSOM provisioning that the JavaScript stuff just did not support. So we needed a way to really sort of take a step back and see what we wanted to do in terms of the JavaScript provisioning support. And so it made sense, we were all talking, the core team last week, so it made sense to remove provisioning from here from the core library. We were already building it into separate JS files for distribution, which was a little confusing and I think had a little bit of unnecessary overlap in some places. But that was really to save on size and some other things from discussions, way earlier in the project. But what we're going to do moving forward, because we do think there is a story that we want to support around folks that want to do provisioning from Node, and I want to be very kind of specific about that. We do not think and do not encourage or recommend provisioning in quotes from a browser session, for example. Most of those things just take too long. Folks might navigate away from a page. Who knows, right? So this would really be around provisioning from Node. So if you wanted to make a Node service you called back to do provisioning. So we're going to have a separate library in GitHub for provisioning. And so I've preserved all that code. We're going to start with that as a starting point. But our goal with that is going to be parity in the sense as much as possible with the CSOM provisioning library. So our aim would be to support the same templates and do as much of the same actions as we can in the same ways. That's going to be challenging, and I'm going to sort of challenge the community a little bit that we are looking for folks who are interested in being heavily involved in that effort to write out that provisioning. It's something, it's going to take time, and we're going to need help to do it. So if the community is interested in it, like I said, we're going to create this library that's separate, that's going to, again, have an NPM release and all these things, and we'll enable that infrastructure, but we're really going to be looking for the community to jump in, get involved, and really help expand the provisioning story in the JavaScript if that's something people are interested in having and using. So we're kind of going to let people vote, with their pull requests in this sense. It's not something that right now the core team has folks. We don't really have folks in general, but the folks on the core team aren't going to have time to 100% build this out. The folks that are doing provisioning are already spending that time in the CSOM library. So I'm going to put that challenge out to the community, that if folks want that provisioning story for Node in JavaScript, help us build that out, and we will support it and help with the infrastructure and those sorts of things. So do please give us feedback on that idea. Let us know, if you want to help. Absolutely want to get you lined up to help, and we'll get that new repo set up here in the coming weeks. So we'll get that set up. So the provisioning is not going away. We're not just dropping it cold, but we are removing it from the core library. So, yep, that's all I have to really say about that. If you have questions or comments, like I said, Gitter, any of the other feedback channels are great. So a couple of things that I haven't mentioned. We used to have a thing about adding use strict to all the files. That's no longer needed, so I've taken that out everywhere. Just a little note, so don't worry about that. We're updating the wiki articles. One thing, there's an issue out there, and it's something I've been working with the product group on now for a little bit, is so if you were to add right now the library to a SharePoint framework project, you're going to get some build errors around duplicate types, around things related to fetch, response, and HTTP init and things like that. So that is still being worked out, but we're going to get that worked out one way or another for 2.0 of our library and GA of the SharePoint framework, such that when SharePoint framework is at GA and we're at 2.0, you will be able to just install and use the core library, and that issue will not be an issue anymore. So just a heads up, I wanted to sort of mention that because that issue's been out there for a while, that it hasn't fallen off the radar. And so that's the demo, and that's the conversation of everything. So now I'll just open it up to questions, comments, feedback, things like that. I know I've just talked about a lot of changes, and I know it's not in, I haven't committed it yet, so folks haven't had a chance to look at it. But open to any questions. When will 2.0 be available? So 2.0 very soon. And really the only blocker is what I just talked about, which is working out that issue with the typings so that when you install the library in a SharePoint framework project, it just works. That's an active discussion I'm having with the engineering team where I think we know what we need to do. It's just a matter of getting it going. Can you provide a GitHub link to the debugger documentation? I can, but if you go to the wiki, it's actually just in the wiki. You'll have to do expand the pages, and you can see debugging. Like I said, it's not in the table of contents, but there's the link for you there. Hopefully you can see that. And we'll update the table of contents. I'm going to kind of refresh the whole wiki with the 2.0 release. So hopefully it'll be easy to find all this stuff when it's ready. But I've got it out there, and it's kind of not hidden, but sort of hidden a little bit, just because 2.0 is not out and some of these features don't work quite yet. Did I work through the holidays on this? A little bit, yes. That's kind of when I found time to do a lot of this stuff. So, but I think valuable for the community to kind of get this done. And one other thing I can mention, on the wiki article, we've also got a deployment article now that talks a little bit more explicitly about deploying these things to production. So it talks about bundling and CDNs. And then I've also added a part here about if you're, again, mentioning those externals in SharePoint Framework, you could set the SPPnP.js to point at our Cloudflare CDN. So you'll notice this is 2.0. 2.0 does not exist yet, so if you try this link, there's nothing there for it, but there will be when we do the release. But still be able to add this as an external for your production deployments. So keep that in mind to help reduce your bundle sizes if you're using the library. What's the status of Visual Studio 2017 building for SharePoint Framework web parts? Vase, I don't know if you have anything else on that, but as far as I know, unchanged.
Yeah, the situation is unfortunately unchanged. Well, at least for now, in the release candidate 2017, there won't be any native capability for client-side webpoints, unfortunately. It's a decision on the Visual Studio side. So we would strongly recommend to learn those few of those new tools. They're not super difficult to learn anyway, but things are what they are. Yes, I do agree on that comment. Woo.
Yeah, it's.
And trust me, everybody in the office. Right? Yeah, exactly. And everybody in the SPFx side, in the SharePoint side, in the Office side are agreeing on that comment as well. So to Kevin's point, I really hope the node provisioning gets some traction. We'll be happy to contribute. Like I said, we are fully supportive of it getting some traction, but it is going to really rely on the community. I want to, again, sort of put that out there and challenge folks that if the node provisioning is something you're want and passionate about, we're going to be relying heavily on the community to build that out. You'll have our support, like if you have questions about how something in the CSOM stuff works or something about the template structure, things like that. I mean, we're here to help, but it's not something anyone on the core team is right now. I mean, unless we get our mythical staff given to us, which fingers crossed every day that I get a staff that shows up. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, you never know. The number of times people ask me if I could get my team to work on something, I kind of look around my room here and go, huh. But it's something, like I said, we're not dropping it cold. We're going to create this other repo, get it set up, get the NPM package, make sure it works, with the library, things like that. So we will support that, but it is going to rely very heavily and entirely on the community wanting to and building that out. So that's going to be the state of that. So if folks are interested, it's going to be a thing, and if nobody cares to contribute, unfortunately, it's going to kind of languish for a little while. That's just going to be the truth around that. Question from tech community: will CSOM system.update be changed to not start workflows? I don't know. Besa?
I'll unmute myself. Yes, so there is a separate method. So there is as part of the November release, we introduced the system update without a version, whatever the method name is. If you call that one, it doesn't start workflows. The update itself does. And actually, system update actually does that. It's a pretty weird thing. We have actually 3 item update methods nowadays in the client-side object model. In server-side, I think we have even one more. In the client-side object model, we have the typical update, we have system update, and then we have this new one which was released as part of the November to address that explicit scenario what you, Russell, are asking. So how do we actually update item without causing a new version to be created, and that it doesn't actually start the workflow, and that you can still override the modified by and modify that and all of that information if you have sufficient permissions. And if that doesn't work for you, just ping us in the Microsoft Tech communities or whatever, and we'll follow up on that.
We can add another system update.
Yes, yes. Well, technically what we're doing is that we're just exposing existing methods which are on the server side. Client-side object model is just a wrapper on calling existing methods. We're not actually implementing anything new. So if we still have one more system update which we haven't exposed, that's always an option.
Good. Any other questions, comments? If not, we can look to close for the day. So our next meeting will be December 22nd. I'm not actually working that day, but I am going to join this meeting because that's how much I care. And so that Vesa can't make fun of me for having another day off this year. And then we will be, that'll be our last meeting, obviously, for the year. And then we will reconvene in 2017, which is scary just to say that. So, but next meeting, December 22nd, which will be the meeting as per the normal schedule. So I know we skipped the last meeting prior to this one, but the next one will be on schedule as expected. So see you guys December 22nd. And then that's all I've got for this week. So thanks, everybody. Keep the great feedback coming. We're looking forward to the 2.0 release. And like I said, the provisioning stuff and all that, do look forward to hearing your feedback. I'll probably get a pull request submitted around all my 2.0 changes so folks can have a look and give feedback by the end of this week, but won't merge it until we're able, like I said, to resolve the type stuff on SharePoint Framework. So that's all I've got for this week. So thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend, and talk soon.
Bye-bye.